This week, in wrestling history, we begin 49 years ago this week on August 1st, 1972. Wrestler and promoter Ray Gunkel was wrestling Ox Baker in Savannah, Georgia. And what a great name, by the way, Ox Baker. I just watched Ox on an old episode of The Price is Right. Seemed like a lovely man. But on this night, he was not so lovely. The two men squared off in a taped fist match that Gunkel won, but when he got back to the dressing room, he collapsed. A hematoma had formed as a result of Baker either chopping him in the chest or hitting him with a heart punch. I've seen both mentioned, and the hematoma had swollen to the size of a gumball. When it suddenly broke off, it formed a blood clot that traveled to his heart, and it led to a fatal heart attack at the age of 48. Baker told a different story to the Orlando Sentinel in the year 2000. He claimed that Gunkel, who had a history of high blood pressure, had gone to an all-you-can-eat buffet before the show. He had 12 pieces of fried chicken, and his heart burst when he went to try to lift Baker up. And an autopsy revealed that Gunkel did have heart disease, but said it played no direct role in his death. The coroner said Gunkel suffered an accidental death due to injury to his heart during the match. I do like the story, though, that he ate fried chicken and his heart exploded. This was not the only death that Ox Baker was tied to. 1 year earlier, there was Alberto Torres, who died at the young age of 37. After participating in a tag team match against Baker, he suffered a ruptured pancreas and he died 3 days later. So promoters started booking Baker and labeling him as a killer, as a way to sell more tickets. After the match with Gunkel, he took the heart punch as a move to play off of what had happened. 39 years ago this week, on July 28th, 1982, months after their match in Memphis at the Mid-South Coliseum, where Jerry Lawler gave Andy Kaufman not one, but 2 pile drivers and sent him to the hospital, came their famous confrontation on The Late Show with David Letterman. Lawler has said that Kaufman was the best thing that ever happened to his wrestling career. It got him national exposure. Andy was a huge wrestling fan. He was obsessed with wrestling. He even pitched the idea to Vince McMahon Sr. backstage once in Madison Square Garden the year before about coming in to do something with the WWF. But McMahon wasn't interested in mixing wrestling with Hollywood. He just didn't want to do that. That was the same night that Kaufman rode the train with Bill Apter back to Bill's apartment, and Apter picked up the phone and called Jerry Lawler. It was midnight. And Lawler was up and he answered the phone and he called Lawler to tell him, hey, guess who I've got with me in my apartment? I've got Andy Kaufman. And the rest is history. So after taking the 2 pile drivers, Andy sold it like his neck was broken. He stayed in the hospital in traction for 3 days to sell it, even though there was nothing physically wrong with him. And then he spent the next 5 months wearing a neck brace. Fast forward to July 28th. Lawler and Kaufman, they were booked on Letterman's TV show to supposedly bury the hatchet and put their differences aside. They were flown to New York, and according to Lawler in his book, they both met with Letterman's producer to go over the segment. The producer wanted Lawler to be a little bit adversarial. Maybe argue back and forth a little bit. Then they would go to break, and they would come back, and Andy would apologize for making fun of wrestling. Lawler would apologize for hurting his neck. And then Andy would get up, and he would sing, "What the world needs is love, sweet love." So they get back to the hotel, and Andy calls Lawler. He goes, so what do you think of what they want us to do? And Lawler says, well, it should be funny, but it's pretty much going to be the end of our program. This is going to be the end of the whole deal with you and me. And Kaufman says, yeah, I know. I don't really like that. I wish there was something else that we could do. He says, what if I refuse your apology and you just slugged me? And Lawler said, well, since the show is taped, A, they probably wouldn't air it, and B, they would have me arrested. And Andy goes, yeah, you're probably right. But man, wouldn't that be great? Well, Andy, yeah, would certainly keep our stuff alive. That's what Lawler told him. So then he tells Lawler, just think about it. And he hangs up the phone. And the two of them didn't speak to each other or see each other again until they were on stage for the show. Lawler said what happened was pretty much ad-libbed. He didn't know what Andy was going to do. Andy didn't know what he was going to do. Things got out of hand verbally between the two of them. And Lawler could hear the music that they were playing in the background because they were playing them to a commercial break. And Lawler knew, once he heard that music come on, he knew, or it was right before the music, but he could tell they were about to cut to a break. And he knew, if I don't do anything now, then that's it. So if I'm going to do something, I better haul off and knock this guy into the middle of next week now before it's too late. And he stood up and he slapped the shit out of him. He hit him so hard, he knocked Andy right out of his chair. And when they came back from commercial, Andy just launched into this profanity-laced tirade, threatening to sue Lawler, calling him a fucking asshole over and over again. And I love the part he's just pacing back and forth, and Letterman is just sitting there, just clearly not knowing, okay, where is this going here? How far is he going to take this? And he comes back over, he goes, I'm sorry. He goes, I'm sorry to use these words on television, but you're a fucking asshole. And he starts cursing again. And he grabbed, I think it was either water or coffee that was sitting on Dave's desk, and he splashed it in Lawler's face, and then he ran off. But the story made national headlines, including in the New York Times. And Lawler claims that Letterman was not smartened up about anything that they did. Letterman, though, in an interview on Mark Maron's podcast a couple of years ago, claimed that Andy did clue him in about what he was going to do with the slap. I mean, I don't know if he told him about the cussing afterwards, but he did tell him, hey, look, I'm going to, we're going to work this thing and he's going to smack me. And he was saying, every time he would have Kaufman on the show, he says Andy was very good about cluing him in advance about what he was going to do. It didn't sound to me like he was just kind of saying that to save face. It's possible that Andy did tell Letterman and Andy didn't tell Lawler that he was going to tell Letterman, but you kind of get two conflicting stories there between Lawler and Letterman. But whoever is telling the truth, it made for great television. And it got Jerry Lawler more mainstream publicity than he had ever gotten, and probably since, in his entire life. 36 years ago this week, on July 30th, 1985, at the WWF Championship Wrestling taping at the Mid-Hudson Civic Center in Poughkeepsie, New York, I can still hear Howard Finkel doing the voiceovers on TV telling us that tickets were available. For weeks on television, all of the heel managers in WWE were courting Randy Savage to offer their services. So Bobby Heenan was there, Jimmy Hart, Mr. Fuji, Classy Freddie Blassie. They were all hoping to become the manager of the Macho Man. But Savage had another name in mind. He thanked them all for their interest before introducing his new manager, making her debut, the first lady of wrestling, and my first wrestling crush, Miss Elizabeth, who was Savage's real-life wife. I think they had just been married the year before. The gig almost went to Missy Hyatt, who was recommended by WWF booker George Scott at the time, but Savage had suggested his wife to Vince McMahon for the role, telling him, look, she's not tall, she's not blonde, but she's really pretty. So, by the way, for anybody doubting, because I joke from time to time on the podcast about Vince McMahon's infatuation with blondes over the years, I love how Savage had to preface this to him. What is this going back? 36 years by saying she's not blonde, but he said that she is very pretty. And when they flew her to Stanford the first time and everybody laid eyes on her and Vince McMahon laid eyes on her, everybody fell in love with her. I mean, how could you not? But can you imagine a young Missy Hyatt as Savage's manager? What a pairing that would have been. 35 years ago this week, on July 26, 1986, on the penultimate night, I love that word, of the Great American Bash Tour in Greensboro, Dusty Rhodes defeated Ric Flair in a steel cage match to win his third and final NWA World Championship. Crockett Promotions took the Bash concept from 1 year before and expanded it in 86 to a month-long tour with Flair, who had been champion for almost 800 days, defending the title each night on every single one of those shows. He defended against names like Magnum TA, Road Warrior Hawk, Road Warrior Animal, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson, Nikita Koloff, and others, including Dusty. And after he lost the title, he challenged Dusty for the belt on the Final Bash show on August 2nd, but then 1 week later, at a live event in St. Louis, Flair beat Rhodes to win the belt back, ending Dusty's final run with the belt at just 2 weeks. Dusty didn't need the belt to stay over. He only needed it to pay off the chase. The real money was in people chasing Flair for the big gold belt, which he held for another 400 plus days after that. 33 years ago this week on July 31st, 1988, WWE presented its WrestleFest show outdoors at the Milwaukee County Stadium, then the home of the Milwaukee Brewers, before 25,000 fans. I am sure this had absolutely nothing at all to do with the Crockett show that was running the very next night in the same city at the smaller Mecca Arena with a War Games main event, which had a much smaller crowd too, at just 3,800 people. But I'm sure one had nothing to do with the other. They booked 15 matches on this show, some of which aired on Primetime Wrestling, most of which were eventually released on Coliseum Home Video, so it wasn't even some kind of big pay-per-view or television event. Randy Savage retained his WWE Championship over Ted DiBiase. Hulk Hogan beat Andre the Giant in a steel cage match, an outdoor steel cage match. It was a very unique setting, I will say that. It was a very unique view when you go back and watch that match, and I think it used to be on the network. As I'm recording this, I can't find it on Peacock, so obviously it's not on there, but you can probably surf around and find the match somewhere. Demolition beat the British Bulldogs, and the Ultimate Warrior beat Bobby Heenan in a weasel suit match. And poor Bobby had to go around the loop. He had to go around the horn, working weasel suit matches every night against the Warrior. No wonder he hated him so much. The final time Hogan and Andre shared a ring together would also be in Milwaukee, but not on this night. It was a matinee show on March 24th, 1990, about a week before WrestleMania 6. 25 years ago this week, on the July 29, 1996 edition of WCW Monday Nitro from the Disney MGM Studios in Orlando, a big night for the NWO, as it was the very first night one of their paid announcement vignettes aired on TV. But it also was the night that Rey Mysterio got lawn darted into the side of a trailer by Kevin Nash. During a match with Sting, Lex Luger, and Randy Savage against the Horsemen, Ric Flair, Chris Benoit, and Steve Mongo McMichael, Jimmy Hart suddenly ran out in a panic. He's grabbing one of the cameramen, he's yelling, "The Outsiders are in the back, the Outsiders are here." He's trying to get everybody's attention in the ring about this invasion that's going on. And he gets all the baby faces and all the heels to stop fighting and to run to the back, where we find Scott Hall and Kevin Nash standing over Marcus Bagwell and Arn Anderson with baseball bats in their hands. And all of a sudden, and there's a trailer there. Rey Mysterio pops out of the trailer, and he climbs up onto the banister. He dives off right into the arms of Kevin Nash. I don't know what Rey thought he was doing, but he got caught by Kevin Nash, who proceeded to lawn dart him headfirst right into the side of the trailer. And once Hall and Nash turn and they see the cavalry is coming, they hightail it into their limousine to go drive off. Randy Savage jumps on top of the limo. He's reaching inside the sunroof as they drive off. Eddie Guerrero is over checking on Rey. The Horsemen are checking on Arn. Everybody is losing their minds. They're really selling this very well. Elizabeth is crying. People were seemingly breaking character. It felt real. It felt authentic and chaotic. Even little details, like when the medics arrived, and I've heard Eric Bischoff talk about this, when the medics arrived and they pulled off Rey's mask, obviously he covered his face up with his hands, but his mask had never been removed like that on TV before. But that's the sort of thing that you would do if you were treating a real injury, a real head injury. The live crowd in the arena couldn't see any of this, and they started chanting "boring," but for us on TV, it was anything but. It was such a chaotic scene that some of the local residents called 911. They actually called the cops to tell them that there was some kind of a gang war taking place at MGM Studios. Yeah, Mickey got tired of Donald Duck's shit. He decided to throw down, I guess. 2 days later, on July 31st, 1996, at the Summer Olympics in Atlanta, Kurt Angle won a gold medal for the United States in freestyle wrestling with a broken freaking neck, beating the Iranian Abbas Jadidi on a judge's decision. They were tied heading into what ended up being a judge's decision in Angle's favor. It was a tough year for Kurt. Not long after he started training with his coach Dave Schultz at his Foxcatcher camp in January, Schultz was gunned down and murdered by John DuPont, who was their sponsor. And later on, during the Olympic trials semifinals, where he punched his ticket to the games, basically, Kurt broke his neck for the first time. He fractured 2 of his cervical vertebrae, herniated 2 discs, and he pulled 4 muscles. And yeah, he may have taken a little bit of time off, but not much, because he was headed to the Olympics. And he did what he had to do to compete. So long before Perk Angle, we had Novocaine Angle, because he would have Novocaine injected directly into his neck to help alleviate the pain so that he could wrestle. Never got his neck fixed the way that he should have, never let it heal the way that he should have. And the one unfortunate thing about that, I mean, he got a gold medal out of it, which, you know, basically was his biggest accomplishment of his entire life. So I'm sure if you asked him, he wouldn't do anything any differently in that regard. But those neck problems really plagued him for the rest of his career. And even now, in retirement, I'm sure his whole body probably doesn't feel too good, but his neck was never the same after that.